Do you ever wonder about the lives behind the handmade things that we find at flea markets and antique shops? Like a hand-stitched table runner, a half-finished embroidery tucked into a tin, or an old box of buttons that someone saved for decades. These weren't meant to be sold. Most weren't even meant to last. But they mattered enough to be kept, and they still speak. That's the power of a hobby. Even the quietest ones can leave something behind. And yet, so often hobbies, especially the ones that women gravitate towards, get dismissed as unimportant. In this fourth episode of my Vintage Living in a Modern World series, I want to talk about something that we don't always give ourselves permission to enjoy. Hobbies. Not side hustles, not another project to add to your to-do list, not monetize your downtime kind of stuff. Just the quiet, maybe slightly odd, deeply satisfying act of doing something purely for yourself, for no other reason than you want to. Especially the vintage ones, the kinds that you might expect and a few that you might not, and why they matter more than ever today. And of course, with all of the episodes in this series, I have put together a companion guide available for you exclusively on my Patreon with ideas and inspiration and a couple of custom-made cross-stitch patterns designed by yours truly in case you feel like you want to pick up a needle and thread. By definition, a hobby is any activity you do for enjoyment, regularly or occasionally, with no expectation of performance, progress, or payoff. And yet that idea feels a little radical these days. We live in a world where everything has to have a purpose. Especially for women, there's often this pressure to turn free time into productivity. And I'll be the first to admit it that I have struggled with that mindset. But the truth is, people have always made time for hobbies. In slower eras, especially the ones that I love, hobbies were woven into daily life. And not everything had to lead to something. So let's explore what it really means to have a hobby. Not a side hustle, not content, just joy. And why they still matter in a modern world that pushes us to always be doing more. I'll be honest, I do find it hard to sit down and do a hobby without some tiny voice in my head whispering,
"What are you doing? Shouldn't you be editing a video or writing a blog post? Don't you have something to organize?"
I've had to unlearn that idea that every spare minute needs to be productive or useful. That mindset runs deep, especially for women. I know that I'm not alone in that. A lot of us were taught, directly or indirectly, that downtime had to be earned, and that unless something was productive or profitable, it's not worth our energy. But that's not how people used to live. In earlier decades, hobbies weren't luxury. They were part of everyday life. Sewing, writing letters, tending to plants, collecting little things that spark joy. These were quiet ways that people filled their time and expressed themselves. And even though so many of those hobbies were dismissed or undervalued, especially because women were the ones doing them, they still mattered. You can see it in the way that some of these pieces have survived. Go to any flea market or antique shop and you'll find hand-stitched linens, embroidered pillowcases, scrapbooks, pressed flowers. Things that were never meant to be sold or displayed in a stranger's home. They were personal, meaningful, and they've outlived trends, technologies, and even their makers. And that tells me something. These hobbies weren't frivolous. They were part of life. And when we reclaim them today, not to be perfect or productive, but simply to feel something, it's a quiet rebellion, a small act of resistance against a world that tells us that we always have to be doing more. So in that spirit, let's walk through some vintage-inspired hobbies, both classic and unexpected, that invite you to slow down and maybe even rediscover something that you used to love. We'll start with some cozy hands-on favorites and move into some less obvious ideas, including some tech-based hobbies that still feel like they belong in a slower world. Let's start with the kinds of hobbies that feel the most hands-on, the ones that connect us to a rhythm, to tradition, and sometimes a little mess. These are hobbies where you stitch something together, stir something warm, or simply style something that makes you smile. I personally love embroidery and cross-stitch, but I will admit that I don't always find it easy to start a new project. That mindset of you should be doing something more important likes to creep in a little bit. But once I do find a pattern that I'm excited about and I pick up that needle, even if it's just for a few minutes a day, I feel calmer, more like myself. There's something magical about creating something with your hands. And not for money, not for Instagram, just because it feels good. Knitting and crochet have that same kind of rhythm, and if you've ever wanted a practical excuse to sit on the couch and watch an old movie with a warm cup of tea, that is it. And it doesn't have to be textiles. Baking an old recipe from a vintage cookbook, making a jar of jam, stirring a pot of something warm and slow and completely unnecessary, just for the sheer pleasure of trying something new. None of it really has to be useful. It just has to be yours. Even the way that you put an outfit together can be a hobby. Not because you have to get dressed for something, but because you want to experiment. Play with texture, try new colors, see how accessories can alter the whole vibe of an outfit. That's hobby energy too. These kinds of activities ground us. They ask us to be present. They're slow on purpose, and they don't need to be perfect to be worth doing. They just need to be something that you enjoy. Now, some hobbies ask us to create, and some ask us to tend, to gather things slowly over time, to nurture something, or to simply notice beauty in the everyday. That's what this next group of hobbies is all about. Gardening is the obvious one, but it doesn't have to mean a sprawling backyard. A few herbs on a windowsill, a balcony tomato plant, or just repotting your houseplants count. There's something beautifully vintage about growing things. It connects us to time, to the seasons, and to the kind of patience that we don't often get to practice in daily life. And sometimes it's not about growing, but preserving. This spring, I made what's called an everlasting dandelion. It's just a simple way to keep that fragile, fleeting beauty intact. I shared the whole process with my Patreon community, and it was such a lovely reminder that even the tiniest things can become kind of a ritual. Whether you're pressing flowers, arranging dried blooms, or just collecting natural bits that speak to you, that small act can feel really grounding and even a little magical. And then there's gathering. Not in a hoarding way, of course, but in a thoughtful, curated, deeply satisfying way. Think of the joy of finding the perfect teacup at a flea market, or building a collection of vintage postcards, or buttons, or fabric scraps, or little dishes that you actually use. Even organizing something you already have, like your spices or your sewing supplies, can be a hobby if you approach it with curiosity and care. I think we underestimate how comforting these small rituals can be, slowing down, placing things with intention, and creating order or beauty just for yourself. These hobbies don't always have to have a finished product. Sometimes they're just about being present, noticing what's around you. And in that way, they're just as meaningful as any masterpiece. Not every hobby is about making or tending. Some are about remembering, reading, writing, reflecting. These quieter hobbies often get dismissed as not real hobbies because they don't produce anything that you can hold, really. But I think they might be the most powerful of all. There's something incredibly intimate about curling up with a good book, especially one with a little age to it. Maybe it's a vintage mystery or a forgotten woman's novel from the 1930s. Maybe it's something you've read 10 times before. That kind of reading isn't about checking off a list. It's about retreating, resting, letting your imagination take the wheel for a while. Journaling is another one that people often skip because it feels pointless. But I can tell you from experience, giving yourself space to just write whatever is in your head without editing it or judging it can be one of the most healing things you'll ever do. And if journaling feels too big, try writing a letter to a friend, to yourself in the future, to someone who'll never read it. There's something beautifully vintage about that kind of slow communication. Another quiet hobby is memory keeping. Things like organizing old photos, archiving vintage family documents, or even digitizing them or creating a scrapbook. And in this digital age, one small but pretty meaningful hobby is to start a monthly photo journal. Pick just a handful of your favorite photos each month. They don't have to be the best lit or the most Instagram-worthy ones, but the ones that make you feel more like you. And put them in a photo album or a digital scrapbook. Not for anyone else, not to share, just as a record of what mattered to you in that moment. It's like stitching together a slow, quiet story of your life that you actually get to revisit. Even listening to old music can be a kind of memory practice. Make a playlist filled with swing music, 1940s ballads, or forgotten lounge tracks from the 1950s. You can soundtrack your whole week with music that transports you. These hobbies are more internal, but they're no less real. They help us feel connected to ourselves, to people we love, and to the past that we often romanticize. And in a world that's constantly asking us to broadcast everything, these quiet habits of remembering and reflecting are their own kind of resistance. Some of the most nostalgic and comforting things that we can do now involve screens, and that's okay. It's about the intention behind how we use them. There's something really satisfying about digitizing old family photos or scanning vintage ephemera. It's a way to preserve the past, but also to interact with it, give it new life. You can make a mood board in Canva or Pinterest that channels the vibe of a 1930s Parisian cafe or your dream vintage kitchen. That kind of digital curating is a hobby too. And if you're someone who enjoys cozy games, there's no shame in that either. Games like Stardew Valley, Unpacking, or A Little to the Left have this slow, satisfying rhythm to them. They're gentle, creative, and let you feel immersed without being overstimulated. Even something like designing your own printable recipe cards or journaling templates in Canva, that's a hobby. It's thoughtful, personal, and lets you bring that vintage aesthetic into your everyday life in a modern way. These kinds of hobbies remind us that vintage isn't about rejecting the modern world. It's about choosing how we engage with it. Slower, softer, with more intention. And here's something I find really comforting, especially if you've ever felt guilty about taking time to just do something that you love. Hobbies don't just give your brain a break, they're actually making it better. Creative and hands-on activities light up the areas tend to memory, empathy, and even problem solving. So that embroidery project or cozy afternoon spent reading, that's not just me time. It's rewiring your brain in all the right ways. So here's your quiet invitation. Pick one hobby, something small, something that feels like you, and give yourself permission to do it. Not necessarily to get better at it, not to make something useful, not to post about it even. Do it simply because it brings you joy. It could be stitching a few lines on a half-finished piece, writing a letter to no one, pulling a favorite book off the shelf, or even just sorting through the photos on your phone and choosing a few to print for yourself. And of course, if you need a little inspiration, I've created the companion guide to go along with this episode. You'll find ideas, prompts, and of course the custom cross-stitch patterns that I design in case you're in the mood to start something new. Your hobby doesn't have to change your life, but it can bring you back to yourself. And sometimes that is more than enough. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you'll find a little joy in the doing this week. I'll see you next time.